Okay, Nick Dutch back again, talking to you in a sort of like raw format today, not only unedited, but also I'm sitting down in a relaxed manner on my seat, just holding my camera in my hand because I think it's like easier to set up because I've got other things to get done this afternoon, so therefore this is the way in which I'm coming over. But my thoughts now is, how should you respond if someone comes up to you and say, how do you do it? All right, what kind of thinking should be going on inside your head in terms of how to explain what it is you're attempting to do and why you're attempting to do it? I think what they're trying to do is to ask, how do they become the kind of person who can even remotely attempt to do something strange? And I do feel that the magical and occult communities explain things badly. They explain things in a bit like Blue Peter. You take a washing up liquid bowl, a bottle like this, you cut it like that with your scissors, and you put your sticky back plastic on it like that. Then, hey presto, you got a money box or something like that. Simple instructions. But let's say that the person who was approaching the Blue Peter person had no understanding of things such as sticky back plastic and scissors. Alright, that's what we're talking about here. If someone who's not experienced anything strange wants to start to become someone who can do something which is relatively strange, what should their exercises be? Firstly, I think the reason that we've got it backward is because people haven't learned the difference between passive observation of the mind and also focused, intense visualization and concentration. And it seems as though the focused, intense visualization and concentration is explained as being the first thing that one should attempt to understand, which leads people into trying to work out what the alpha rhythm is and all that kind of stuff. What if I was to tell you that what could work out better is to understand passive imagination and passive visualization first, and passive contemplations first? So that's when mindfulness as a practice could come in. That's when you're sitting down, relaxed, trying to calm yourself down and allowing thoughts to come up into the consciousness, but not necessarily assuming that you have deliberately thought those thoughts, because it is a function of the mind that thoughts arise. And then you can learn to observe that's what appears in the mind. Then if it's to do that for, let's say, a few weeks or a few months or something, okay, until you've got a bit of a firm grasp of that, then you'll understand what passive observation of the mind is. Then it would be a bit of a leap of faith for them to assume that some of the things which is bubbling up into the mind is something which could be coming essentially from outside and triggering memories, thoughts, feelings, and emotional reactions. Then they could be in a position of having learnt what it means to observe in a calm, relaxed, passive way things which arise in the mind, and also to associate some of them with hypothetical spiritual forces, entities, beings, and the like, but without moving into extreme paranoia that, oh my god, that must mean there's a devil in the bedroom or something stupid like that. Then you could then move on to the development of more concentrated, focused meditations, and traveling into through visualized journeys into various symbols, into various realms, to speak with attempt to speak to various different beings and power animals and all the rest of that kind of stuff. Because it's only when you've learned what it feels like to be receptive can you then learn how to then be receptive to other things and other happenings and other conversations and communications which appear to be happening through your meditations, which could of course be purely psychological, but on the other hand maybe it isn't, and maybe there's something else going on here. Then it might be easier for the individual to be able to ascertain what comes from their mind and what might not come from their own mind, and what could even be a triggered response. I mean, let's say one day you're going through a beautiful walk in the countryside, everything's lovely, birds are singing and there's trees and flowers and everything is absolutely lovely, and all of a sudden you suddenly get a memory coming back from something that happened 15 years ago which really, really upsets you, and you go into a huff and you become all bitter and resentful and unpleasant and all the rest of it, and then you're still carrying that defensive aggression with you as you go through your day. Is there a hypothetical possibility that that is, number one, the mind trying to sort itself out and giving you an emotional experience so you can then learn how to manage that better? Hypothetically, possibly yes. Could that be something coming from outside? And let's say a hypothetical negative energy which doesn't really like you for some particular reason is then placing a trigger in you which then brings up that particular thought and that chain of thought processes, so that it's therefore harmful to you because someone else is, as it almost as if someone else is playing a practical joke on you or a trick, but a trick of the mind. Is that a hypothetical possibility? It's definitely a hypothetical possibility, all right? Just like when let's say you were to then, having practiced for a while and learned that when you get these things arising in the mind, they are there for you to learn how to deal with better. Okay? That's then, you could then develop right thinking skills and the rest of that to try and focus on how to do that stuff and how to do that stuff well. If it's purely psychological. But also, if it isn't, or indeed if it is, but there is a spiritual method or approach of dealing with it in another way, then could one then use meditation, prayer, invocation of deities, all done inside your head? You don't want anyone else to know what you're doing and thinking, of course, in order to try and moderate the, let's say, negative things which approach within the mind? Well, maybe. And then there's the issue of, like, after a period of time, you also then get yourself into things like Reiki healing and try and do healings upon other people. Could you then try and deploy that same way of thinking when you've got your hands on somebody else or indeed near somebody else, so you're sending them that energy and also being sensitive to what's going on inside them as a person? Hypothetically, possibly, yes. And let's say they then react because they can feel, in their own words, lightning and fire coming out of your hands, or all of a sudden they start having an emotion which is like completely inappropriate for the situation, like they suddenly start bursting out in tears or this, that and the other about all kinds of problems from their childhood or something. Maybe you've actually done something, you've actually helped to release something inside them, and maybe that's a way of approaching how forms of psychological or spiritual healing could operate using essentially spiritual methods. But there's a difference, isn't there, between the relaxed passive awareness and understanding that mindfulness will provide, as opposed to the intense focus of someone trying to tune themselves to a particular energy for the purposes of healing. Does that make sense? And then there's the issue of trying to connect both of them together so you can both have the the high frequency meditative prayerful state which you've developed and the visualization of, light coming out of your hands and breathing that into somebody else, as well as having part of your perception being mindfully aware, not trying to overly analyze as a scientist would be trying to analyze the temperature of something boiling in a test tube, or various, changes in the chemical structure of this, that and the other, using intellectual analytical techniques, because that wouldn't necessarily help in the spiritual state you need to be in. But with the mindfulness, thinking, a thought or a feeling has arisen, what is that to do with? Or a perception has arisen, or I've seen something in my visual imagination. What's that, what could that really be about? I'm sorry today's video has been a bit rambling, but can you see where I'm coming from here? I think that the explanation that's given about what type of meditations people should be doing and how they should be doing it has in fact been quite wrong. And mindfulness is about sensitivity to what goes on inside you, but it's also potentially, hypothetically, sensitivity to what could be happening outside of yourself being filtered through your own perceptual apparatus. That lady who wrote that book on exorcism that I told you about in a previous video, she suggested that the religion of the person or their belief system is like their operating system. Okay, and the visual imagination is kind of like the screen. It's like the VDU. Right, so your operating system, no matter what particular theological train of thought that you're involved in, and your perceptions would then somehow sculpt and confirm your spirituality when you're going into strange experiences. Okay, so someone who's like from a strong Christian magical tradition, they'll be visualizing things like angels. Someone from a very earth-centered world will be focusing on things like fairies, but maybe it's the same force. We don't, there's still a bit of a this, that, and the other about that, as far as I can tell, but I could be wrong. I mean, these could be separate, different entities living in different planes of reality, overlapping with ours in some particular way. I mean, there's nothing to say that could not be the case, but we don't really know enough to be able to make that hard and fast judgment. So starting with mindfulness, or incorporating more mindfulness to develop more sensitivity, and also that sensitivity could be directed through intention to the body as well as the mind, or the deeper mind, or the higher consciousness, as well as objects, places, and people. Or, if you have that kind of understanding, layers of the aura and chakras, if you know what I'm talking about. Or if you have the other understanding, ley lines and that sort of thing. And I don't think it'll be necessarily easy to switch gears too much theologically, but for some people can and some people can't. For myself, I'm a believer it's all part of the same thing, so it's not really a problem for me. But some people would kind of like struggle to properly switch gears. But starting with mindfulness appears to be a good step forward. Then moving on to the journeying, the visual journey, the imaginary journey, and then after that going on to working out how you're placing your intention to try and link into specific apparent hypothetical forces. But then you've got the issue of what are you interacting with and why? And what should you do with it when you're there? To which the Exorcist Handbook seems to provide some possible hypothetical approaches, some of which seem quite good. And just like with everything else, it raises more questions than it gives answers. But think about it. If you're not someone who's done a lot of mindfulness, I would do it. If you are someone who's done a lot of mindfulness, then maybe your next step is to move into meditative shamanic journeying. Remembering, of course, what I mentioned in previous videos, that the state of gnosis, the altered state of consciousness thing that we actually need to do to attempt anything weird in terms of, hypothetical spiritual contact, happens to be the state of mind of prayer, which you will also have needed to learn how to cultivate. Possibly prior to going into your experience. And also the opening of chakras beforehand, in sequence, using whatever visual cues is appropriate for that. I use a visualized light which changes color as I'm turning this visualized knob with numbers 0 to 7 on it, with 0 having no color and 1 being red, 2 being orange, and so on and so forth until number 7 is brilliant white. And that changes the color of the light, and then that's does its thing on me, and I can feel it. Okay. And then starting to, visualization of a door, going through the door into whatever the next stage of your visualized journey is. And when you're in that thing, when you're in that experience, and being able to be mindful so you're open to things that happen, which could be creatures moving around in the rocks, it could be seagulls flying overhead, a boat on the horizon, someone even talking to you. But it's the mindful awareness which seems to allow that to happen. But the focus concentration on the visualization, if you're just doing that, oh, I've got to visualize it, you really, really stress yourself out about visualizing it. That puts you under so much pressure that you can't necessarily achieve what you want to do. And it takes away the receptiveness from the experience. Does any of this make sense to you? If it does, let me know in the comments section. If it doesn't, let me know in the comments section, and just give me a thumbs up and all that subscribe-y, YouTube-y. Just do it. So I'll speak to you again in a bit with something new, interesting, different and weird.